Now, one way of improving the user experience here would be to go to the server action and await this database update, to which I again added some delay to simulate a slower connection. And then thereafter, we should call the revalidate path function, which must be imported from next/cache. Now, what's this function about? Well, by default, Next.js caches data pretty aggressively, and we'll take a closer look at how Next.js caches data and what that means for you in the next section. But what you should know here is that Next.js does indeed cache page data, and therefore, by default, it will not pick up changes to data that's reflected on the page. So of course those changes are stored in the database, but the page doesn't update just because some database data changed. Instead, Next.js by default will show you that cached page, which is based on old data potentially, and that's why this change isn't picked up. Now, revalidate path then is an important function which you should call whenever you are changing some data that is shown on some page. And indeed later we will also need to call it after adding a new post, but I'll get back to this later. So for now we should call it here to tell Next.js that some data of some page changed, and we need to tell Next.js which page's data changed. Now, attached you find a link to the official revalidate path documentation, because it turns out that there are quite a few different ways of configuring this function or of calling this function and of defining the path of the page or pages that should be revalidated, so that should be removed from the cache so that an updated version is shown. Because that's the main task of this function. It tells Next.js that some page or pages need to be revalidated, that it should not continue showing the cached versions, but instead create updated versions. And for that, you can, for example, define the path to one of your pages, for example, to the feed route. With that, we would make sure that whenever the user visits that feed route, an updated version is served. And indeed, if that's called whilst the user is on the feed route, Next.js will update the page behind the scenes and show an updated version of the page automatically. And therefore, by just adding this code here to toggle post like status, if we go back and reload, and I now click here, you see initially nothing changes, but after a short while, this does change magically. And I did not reload the page or anything like that. Instead, Next.js found out that this feed page on which I was here was updated, or that I told it that it should revalidate that page. And since I was on that page, it automatically updated it behind the scenes. Now here you actually also might want to make sure that Next.js is not just revalidating the feed route, but actually maybe all pages of the application, which you can do by using just a slash here and then passing a second argument where you set a string of layout. That essentially means that all the pages that are wrapped by the root layout should be revalidated, which in this case are all the pages of this application. And again, you can learn about all the details of configuring different paths, including paths to dynamic segments here in that official documentation. But that's one way of revalidating that will make sure that all pages pick up that latest data. So that's an important improvement here. But it's not the only improvement I want to make, because of course with that we still have the problem that if I change that status, it takes a short while until that change is reflected here. And that's not ideal.